Nowadays, the environmental impact of any new car is something we all feel, whether or not you're interested in your carbon footprint or if you're just taxed heavily on driving interesting, fast cars. We all know how much fuel our car uses, but back in 1997, when Toyota created the first Prius Hybrid, it really wasn't that big a deal. Turns out Toyota were well ahead of the curve with the whole hybrid thing, because nowadays these cars are some of the cheapest to run. And the Prius still is with us. It's been in several generations now, and the latest one has been with us for a few years, but the recipe is pretty similar to that first car back in 97. Pairing a small petrol engine with a small electric motor and battery to drive down fuel bills. But the Prius is far from the only hybrid you can buy these days. Here in Australia, there are several Toyota hybrids on the market, but 4 that we think are really worthy of consideration. The Prius is still the most economical of the bunch, but you can now get a brand new Camry Hybrid. These have been around for a few years, but this one is the first that promises to be really good to ride and to drive as well. There's also a new Corolla Hybrid that's been on the market for about a year now. It's the best looking Corolla ever in our opinion. Very similar driveline in Australia to the Prius, but in a more stylish package. But now Toyota are making their really big play into hybrids. This is the first RAV4 hybrid that's ever come to Australia. In fact, hybrid RAV4s make up most of the range of this new crossover. So, is hybrid the way to go for your next car purchase? We're going to be finding out today.
But first, let's step into the car that really started the hybrid phenomenon for good, the hyper-efficient Prius.
The Prius still has easily the most futuristic design, both outside and in. It's kind of interesting to me that the Prius still exists because although it gets the best fuel economy of this pack, as we'll find out shortly, it's kind of like Toyota has developed hybrid to the point now where you can get it in mainstream cars that, you know, you'd kind of only buy a Prius if you were chasing that absolute best fuel economy. But I guess some people still are. Inside, it's certainly very different, and I think pretty cool actually. You have this dominant center stack here, an 8-inch touchscreen, and you have the sort of reminiscent from the original Prius. You've got this big cluster up the top that gives you your digital speedo and some information on your driving style and the hybrid system. A small steering wheel, nothing directly in front of you, but you do get a head-up display, which is fantastic, so you can see your speed in your line of sight. The seats are pretty comfy. You'd be able to drive this thing, you know, most of the day without getting too sore, I reckon. And practicality is, it's just okay. You get 2 cup holders, you get a little bin down here that opens up side to side. You get wireless charging and decent sized door bins. But what about in the back? Because let's face it, the Toyota Prius is very popular as an Uber vehicle. So you want to be seating people in comfort in the second row, and you can pretty well do that. Headroom's okay. I've got a little bit extra as a 6-footer, but I've got plenty of leg room. Toe room's a little bit tight, however, sitting behind myself. You can get 3 people abreast in the back, but I reckon the Prius is better as a 4-seater. One surprising thing though, despite the fact this is a popular rideshare and taxi vehicle, no air vents in the back and also no fast charging USB ports. The Prius was the OG Toyota hybrid, and it has changed a lot over the years. The shape is still pretty futuristic, but the engine has become even more economical than the first couple of generations of this car. But really, a lot of the basics are similar, just less components are driven by the petrol engine, and that's how they've got the fuel economy figured down further. So we've got a 1.8 litre petrol, we got an electric motor, they work together, and they get your fuel consumption reliably into the high 3s, which is seriously frugal. So if you drive a lot in town for a living and you want low fuel bills, this thing is great. If you live in a market where there's carbon taxing on cars, this thing only uses 80 grams per kilometre of CO2, which is super, super low. Now, it feels, you know, relatively agile, nimble, and quite quick around town, thanks to the sort of electric boost that you get at low speeds. But the Prius is noticeably louder in the way it goes about its business compared to everything else here. There's less sound insulation, so you get more road noise, but you also hear that transition to petrol power really clearly, so the refinement just isn't as good. The suspension is still pretty plush, and actually the handling of the Prius isn't bad because, like everything else here, it sits on Toyota's new TNGA platform. So you have a nice low center of gravity, and it's actually quite good to drive on a back road, which is unusual. The steering in particular is a real highlight. Accurate, quick, it feels natural. Certainly the Prius is still, the archetypal Toyota hybrid, the one you buy if you want to reduce your fuel bills as much as you can, while having a relatively roomy and spacious car too.
Next up, the Camry Hybrid, Toyota's large sedan that sees a 2.5 litre petrol paired with an electric motor.
The Camry, it was never something that you could call stylish or particularly desirable until this one came along, because not only does this car look better outside, the interior is streets ahead of the previous Camry. It's now a really nice place to spend time. There's heaps of soft surfaces, this little upholstered bit on the dash, down here on the armrest, and it kind of looks cool and arty as well with all these sort of geometric shapes. I like it. You get the 8-inch touchscreen out of the other cars here as well. It's nice and easy to use. You get decent seats that are nice and supportive over long distances. You can get them in this black, but you can also get them in a beige color if you so desire, or even red in sportier Camrys. Get a nice little steering wheel, part analog, part digital gauges that work well, and practicality is okay. Nice deep central bin, 2 decent sized cup holders, wireless charging, and okay sized door bins. But the back is what really counts in a Camry, because this vehicle is designed to be really a full-size sedan these days. So for me, as a 6-footer in the back, headroom's pretty good, got another inch or so, amazing legroom, and tow room is, good too. It's almost limousine-like, sitting behind my own driving position. The bench is also pretty comfy. You got rear air vents, you got fast charging USB ports. That's all good to see. And a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders and a little bit more support for your arm here as well. Here in the Camry Hybrid, we have Toyota's more powerful hybrid drivetrain than you get in the Prius and the Corolla, and the same one as in the RAV4. So a 2.5 litre Atkinson cycle petrol 4 and a decent sized electric motor and battery. So combined output is 160 kilowatts. Back in the day, we would have thought that was plenty from a V6 Camry, and in fact, it does perform basically like you'd expect a V6 to. It's nice and strong, it's very torquey, and it feels quick both at low speed and on the highway where it's nice and refined. It's also very frugal for a large car. We've been doing about 5.3 litres per 100 Ks, which is, definitely better than you'd be getting in like a 4-cylinder ZB Holden Commodore or even a diesel Ford Mondeo. It's really quite nice. It's also refined, it doesn't sound too noisy. However, I think you can hear the transition from electric to petrol a little bit more so than you can in the RAV4, which I think is a little bit more insulated again. However, the Camry has this nice sort of plush ride quality, but it can really turn it on in cornering as well, which is the biggest surprise about the new Camry, is that it actually does have an interest in athletic driving, and it can be, decently fun on a good road, even in the hybrid. And that's because the extra weight of those batteries is kept nice and low in this car, so the center of gravity is low. Whereas the RAV4 is a tall car, here in the hybrid you have the powerful setup, but coupled to a car-like sort of stance, which is really quite nice.
Next, let's step into the Corolla Hybrid, which in Australia shares a drivetrain with the Prius, a 1.8 litre petrol and an electric motor.
Okay, the Corolla, definitely the best interior a Corolla's ever had. I really like this little car, as you can see by watching our Corolla review, by clicking up in the top right-hand corner. Not everyone likes the sort of tacked on touchscreen look, but it's a good unit, 8 inches in size. It's got this nice kind of stitched dashboard here. That stitching carries on down here and on the doors, but much like the RAV4, unless you get the top end specifications, you get lots of hard plastic. Here in this ZR, we get all the nice soft touch stuff, which is much nicer. A Volkswagen Golf gives you all of that as standard across the range, keep in mind. You do get a digital instrument cluster, that's quite nice. Plus the ZR's part leather, part like Alcantara or suede seats are comfortable and supportive. Practicality though, it's not amazing because the Corolla is actually pretty small. So we do have wireless charging, we got 2 small cup holders, a very small little central bin. It does have a fast charging USB port, however. What about in the back? Obviously, among this set, the Corolla is the least designed for carrying people. And as such, the back seat is really tight. And we've talked about how the packaging in the Corolla is not that great. And we're reminded of it here. 6-footers have got enough headroom, but legroom and toe room sitting behind myself is definitely the tightest of this bunch. You do get air vents in the top spec car. We also get this fold down armrest with cup holders, but no additional USB ports here in the back. The Corolla is available in a couple of flavours in Australia. There's a new Atmo 2-litre engine and also this 1.8-litre hybrid. Yes, I did say 1.8 because here in Australia we don't really get the global standard Corolla Hybrid, and that's a shame. In Europe, you get a 2-litre that makes 130 kilowatts, and by all accounts that sounds really tasty. This is kind of like an old Toyota hybrid drivetrain. It's shared with the Prius, so combined output is only 90 kilowatts. So it's quite a modest vehicle. It's certainly not quick, and I think I still prefer the atmospheric 4-cylinder. What I'd really like to see is Toyota bring in the best Corolla hybrid that they can for Australia. That said, most people aren't going to notice that sort of stuff that us car enthusiasts are into. And, you know, all things considered, the Corolla Hybrid is a really good town runabout. It's frugal, there's nothing wrong with the economy of this drivetrain. It's, you know, decently refined, although there is more road and wind noise than in, say, the Camry or the RAV4 Hybrid. But you still get that nice little bit of electric boost to jump into sort of open lanes or whatever around town, and it's a little bit more effortless than the Atmo 4 at very low speeds. In terms of fuel economy, we've been getting around sort of 5 litres per 100 Ks, which is, you know, decent for this class. But the real standout for Corollas is their handling and steering. These things finally can go around corners in a way that rivals like a Ford Focus or a Volkswagen Golf, which is great. They're satisfying to drive, they ride well, they're just not that roomy, but you got other options here.
And now it's time to have a look at the latest Toyota hybrid for Australia, the RAV4, which uses the same drivetrain as the Camry, a 2.5-litre petrol with electric motors on the front and rear axle if you go for all-wheel drive like this one.
Inside, the RAV4 is the newest of this pack, and it demonstrates kind of Toyota's latest attitude to designing interiors, and there's a lot to like about it. Now, keep in mind, this particular car is a RAV4 Cruiser, so we get all the high-end appointments. You don't get these soft door surfaces lower down in the range, but you do get a cool digital display. All RAV4s get this big 8-inch touchscreen up here with navigation and digital radio, plus a nice broad looking dashboard that implements some stuff from the Kluger/Highlander, like this shelving system here and here. Plus the seats are these nice big comfortable pews that feel really supportive. There's lots of storage spaces as well, but what about room in the back? Because ultimately this is the most practical RAV4 hybrid that will have come to Australia as yet, and room in the back is good. So for 6-footers like me, there's another couple of inches of headroom, really good leg room and toe room, and you're well supported on this seat base because the batteries are underneath it. Get some amenities, a couple of cup holders, air vents, and fast charging USB points here in the back. This is the only car here that's available with all-wheel drive, and if you do that in the RAV4, you actually get a little power bump on the 2.5-litre hybrid setup as well. That's because opting for the E4 all-wheel drive system actually puts a motor on the rear axle. Now, total output only climbs from 160 kilowatts in the front-wheel drive form to 163 kilowatts, so we're not talking night and day differences, but it's still an interesting bit of trivia to note. Now, the RAV4 really does feel like the latest development of the sort of hybrid way of doing things in a vehicle, and certainly this is the least compromising Toyota hybrid ever sold in Australia. It simply integrates just as easily into your life as any other medium SUV. Even if you had zero care about how the hybrid system works, you'd still be able to extract really good fuel economy out of this thing. We're doing about 5.5 litres per 100 Ks, which is better than the best diesel mid-size SUVs. And you can fill it up with 91 octane fuel like the rest of the cars here. The handling is very much tuned for comfort rather than for sport in the RAV4, and I don't see that as a bad thing. Instead, I think this car does a really good job of being a nice urban runabout. The tall sidewalls do a great job of soaking up potholes and speed bumps and other urban imperfections. It's quiet, it's refined, it's roomy, it's easy to see out of. For a lot of people, this RAV4 is going to make the most sense out of anything here. But what about the amount of stuff you can take with you? Because each of these hybrids differs in the amount of cargo room on offer. Here in the Prius, behind this liftback, in the upper spec variant in Australia, there's 343 litres of space, over a bit of a lip there. But as you can see, the Chasing Cars suitcases fit without any problem. And if you're going to be using this car for, say, ride-sharing duties, that is going to be important. But because it's that sort of diagonal liftback, you don't have a wagon-like body, so it's not the most practical of this set. The Camry isn't bad, but obviously you're dealing with a sedan form factor. There hasn't been a Camry wagon for years, but underneath this sedan boot, there's a good amount of room, even in the hybrid. So there's in fact 524 litres of space. Once again, a really big lip to lift stuff over, but at least the Camry is a very low car. So putting things in, you'll be all right, but just that sort of bending over to take things back out. Now you do have these releases to drop the rear seats. That's always nice. Plenty of room in the Camry, but we need to talk about the Toyota Corolla because one of the biggest rolling jokes of the industry in the last year has been its boot. This particular grade is the top spec ZR Hybrid, so you don't have any spare tyre at all. And as such, it's got 333 litres of space, which isn't too bad actually. The Chasing Cars suitcases can stack on top of one another, but if you go for any other Corolla model, the boot is really, really tiny. So that's something you're going to have to keep in mind if you're looking at this car to mix between carrying people and cargo. Really though, Toyota have kind of addressed all those issues in the RAV4, because not only do we have a practical wagon body, because this is a traditional SUV, it's also got the biggest boot among these hybrids by far, 580 litres in fact. And the fact this is a hybrid actually doesn't compromise its boot space at all, because the batteries are packaged underneath the rear seat in the RAV4. So given that the RAV actually isn't that big, it's actually a smaller car than the version it replaced, this is really the one to go for if what you want is generous cargo carrying capacity on top of everything else. I think it's super interesting to have watched the progression of Toyota's hybrids from being a pretty weird science experiment with the first Prius through to offering a few different options now that lets you blend getting your carbon footprint down in your personal motoring without having to make too many compromises with how these cars drive and how they work in the real world. In fact, that's probably the biggest thing, is that because these hybrids don't require any charging at home, in fact, any plug-in charging at all, you kind of just let them do their thing, and it's a super easy way to use less petrol, pay less money on your fuel bills, and contribute less to global warming, if that's your thing. Each of these cars do something well. The Prius actually uses less fuel in the real world. The Camry is really comfy. The Corolla is actually really spirited to drive and has great handling, whereas the RAV4 kind of combines all of those attributes into a frugal and comfy SUV. Plus, it's the only vehicle here that you can get with all-wheel drive in Australia. So there's a little overview of 4 newish and new Toyota hybrids that you can buy right now. If you haven't subscribed already to Chasing Cars, please do so below the video. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our full-length and in-depth Australian video car reviews. And make sure you leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of these cars or any suggestions or requests for the channel. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.